Well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. We're here at Clarence Court, which is a significant venue in the context of the campaign, and I'm here with some great people who were involved in that campaign in a number of different ways. As you may know, or it might be new information to some of you, on the 25th of January 1984, the Conservative Foreign Secretary announced that trade unions would be banned from the Government Communication Headquarters, or GCHQ. And that decision marked the start of one of the most intensive campaigns for the union movement, especially for the 14 workers at GCHQ that were sacked after refusing to take the government bribe and give up basic rights at work. When they were sacked, their lives changed forever, and the campaign that ensued changed the union movement. So I'd like to introduce the panel tonight. We have here with us Hugh Lanning, the PCS FTO at the time, John Sheldon, the General Secretary of PCS, the Civil Service Union at the time, Mike Grindley and Brian Johnson, who were sacked members. Mike was a Chinese linguist who became the chair and the face of the campaign. Brian had worked as a technician in the RAF and became the first health and safety representative at GCHQ. We also have Kate Haig, who is branch secretary for Society of Civil and Public Servants Union, and Quinn Talon, who is the secretary of the Cheltenham Trades Council. Welcome everybody online and in the room. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Nigel has a little introduction video for you to start with.
On the 25th of January 1984, Geoffrey Howe, the Conservative Foreign Secretary, announced in Parliament that staff at the government's communications headquarters, GCHQ, would no longer be allowed to be members of a trade union or have access to rights under the Employment Protection Act. Mrs. Thatcher declared, "There is an inherent conflict between the structure of trade unions and loyalty to the state." For civil servants who'd given years of dedicated service, this was a deep and shocking insult. It came at a time of major assault on trade union power by the state. The government's strategy was for a step-by-step attack on workers' rights. After the NGA's defeat in the messenger dispute, it was the turn of civil servants.
Unions concede the government's got its way over Cheltenham and the handful who've defied the ban. Good evening. The government has won its fight to get rid of unions at the Cheltenham Communications Centre. The civil service unions have conceded that the vast majority of staff have now signed the government's form, either agreeing to leave their union or accepting a transfer from Cheltenham. But they say they'll fight to restore the unions. They're trying to set up a new society of GCHQ staff, and they say they'll stand by anyone sacked for refusing to sign the government's form. Bill McCall of the Civil Service Union said Cheltenham workers had been subjected to intensive and disgusting pressure by the government. At Westminster, Mrs. Thatcher thanked the majority who'd signed the form. They were now well in excess of 90%, she said. Tonight in Cheltenham, fewer than 100 workers who refuse to leave their union or GCHQ are meeting to plan their next move.
The unions have waged a skillful and determined campaign over GCHQ, but it wasn't enough to force the government to back down.
It's clear now the vast majority have accepted, and now obviously it will be necessary to try and handle the other problems, and people who have strong views of principle, to handle those as sympathetically and as understandingly as it's possible to do. Because
there could yet be problems. Some people will never give up their unions, but the government's obviously anxious not to create any union martyrs.
The long fight back began. Some workers refused to give up their union membership, and the TUC rallied to their support. When they were sacked, the campaign stood by them. And for more than a decade, led by Mike Grindley as their chair, the GCHQ unions fought on and kept the demand for restoration of rights at the centre of all trade union events and activities. The unions rebutted the government's claims and challenged the decision politically, legally, every year at Tolpuddle, and every January on the anniversary through the streets of Regency Cheltenham. They won support from around the world and exposed the government's lies in international bodies. And they made sure that the Labour Party held to its promise to restore trade union rights. And in 1997, the new Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, lifted the ban. The sacked workers marched back into GCHQ. Since then, the campaign has not been forgotten and has become a source of inspiration for trade unions here and around the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nigel Costley from the Southwest TUC, for that really great little video. I think it's great to see the pictures and to get a good idea of the overall story. Just to introduce myself, my name's Hannah David, and I am a National Executive Member for PCS, and I'm here chairing as Chair of the Southwest TUC. It would be really lovely to have a little introduction from each of the panelists tonight now. So if I start with the first question to each of you, just what was your role? What were you doing at the beginning of this story? If we go around.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the introduction. My name's Hugh Lanning, and I was the full-time official working for the Civil Service Union when the ban was announced. And I looked after our members inside GCHQ. And though we were the smallest civil service union, we were the largest union inside GCHQ. And at the precise time, I'd just come away from a meeting with the Foreign Office, who was making my way back to union headquarters, having done my shopping for the afternoon, which never reached its destination, and my wife and her friend at home.
Mike?
Mike with me, I'm a Chinese linguist, and I was sitting at my desk in the Chinese section at 3:15 in the afternoon when the dreaded envelope arrived, a grey envelope. It wasn't a British envelope, being printed by National Security Agency in Washington, security state. Nobody must know about this. Anyway, I was racked, after I read through, I was racked with a mixture of incredulity, sheer anger, and also increasing sort of anxiety. What was going to happen? I feel sure that everybody it was a total unknown and totally unexpected. Anyway, I thought to myself, no way would I take any of their filthy bribes, the infamous £1,000 less tax. So I went down the bicycle sheds, hopped on my bike, and cycled around the Hayes Road where Alex Laurie lived. He was a man who'd been, he was my county councillor, Labour county councillor, and he'd been in trouble with GCHQ already and more or less got thrown out. And he read through the contents of the letter. And I remember him staring at me in the face and he said, "This is outrageous." And he asked permission if he could borrow the documents. I said, "Yeah, of course." And he rang the local paper, the Gloucestershire Echo, and they sent a taxi to collect it. So that was the first way in which the world started to know what had happened. Unless you happened to be in the House of Commons at the time. And most of the cabinet, it was as much a shock to them as it was to the likes of us. So Thatcher kept us very tightly in her own grip.
John?
Yeah.
Well, I'm John Sheldon, and I was the secretary of the CSU at the time. First thing we knew about this ban was when we were all called to cease to Robert Armstrong in the Civil Service Permanent Secretary and advisor to the cabinet. And we all turned up, all the General Secretary of the unions turned up and sat with Robert Armstrong. And he said, "I've got an announcement to make, but I can't start it until the announcement is started by Howe in the House of Commons." We knew nothing about this at all. We hadn't heard anything. There was not even a whisper in the trade union movement or presumably in the cabinet. And he read it out and it was unbelievable. We could not believe what we were hearing. And perhaps the language wasn't all parliamentary either. And we all decided that the best thing to do was to get back to our head offices and start the campaign, which is exactly what happened. We all left. They refused to let us use the phones inside the Treasury. We had to jump in taxis then. There was no mobile phones, and we all went back to our respective head offices and started the campaign. And Hugh Lanning led the campaign, and who disappeared off the Cheltenham, and he was wearing my underpants the following day because he didn't have any with him as we set off down. So that's a nice memory for it to start with.
Might be nice for you.
Thank you so much. And Brian?
Thank you. I was sitting at my desk my bench where I worked at the time. Unfortunately, I had a radio on because I was in the room on my own, and I probably heard the announcement in GCHQ before the majority of the staff, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought, is this England? And it just took my breath away, and I just couldn't get over it for 3 or 4 days. My wife couldn't imagine what I was going. Well, she couldn't realise what was going on, and she didn't believe what was happening to me.
Thank you. And Quinn?
Yeah, I'm Quentin Tallow. During the campaign, I was the secretary to the Cheltenham District TUC, and I was in a position when the ban was announced, like the rest of the general public, that we were informed that people at GCHQ were not allowed to belong to a national trade union of their choice. And this is the first time that this had ever happened in this country to public servants. And at the time, the secretary of our body, his partner, worked at GCHQ and was one of the people who was sacked. So right from the start of it, that we were involved in it, and we were kept fully involved.
Lovely, thank you. And Kate?
Well, I actually hadn't even started my career in civil service when the ban was announced, but in October I was posted to the Ministry of Defence at RAF Innsworth, and almost immediately realised that this campaign was happening, and that if it was successful at GCHQ, then civil servants like me working in the Ministry of Defence would be next. And it was clear that the whole of the civil service were on Thatcher's hit list. So obviously it was very close to home in that I was a civil servant, but also it was very close to home. It was literally at the other end of the Golden Valley bypass. So became very actively involved quite quickly in local campaigning.
That's lovely. Thank you, everybody. And I think that's a good kind of rolling final answer, going on to the next, I think, stage, which would be the ban itself. And I think a useful thing would be if Hugh, you gave a bit of the context and that initial start.
Thank you. I think what's important to realise is that no one knew what GCHQ was or that it existed. I mean, this was a bigger story because of the coming out of GCHQ into the public domain. I mean, so much so that lots of partners of people who worked in GCHQ found out during the course of the campaign what their partners had actually been doing. They didn't know, because in the union we had to use a cover story. We had to describe GCHQ as a composite signals organisation, so that it didn't reveal that it was involved in signals intelligence, and everyone thought they were just beaming signals around the world, you know, which wasn't what they were doing. And the grades that we were responsible for, the radio grades they were called, and all of this was just a sort of an elaborate sort of cover, and people in Cheltenham knew there was a big place that employed lots of civil servants, but weren't really sure unless they worked there quite what it did. So that was partly what made it news. And the other thing was what Quinn had just said, is that this was the government trying to ban its own employees from belonging to a trade union, and the way they sought to do that was unilaterally change the conditions of service of members of staff. So they were issued with this letter that Mike referred to, which they had to sign, agreeing that they would no longer be a member of a trade union. If they didn't do that, they were threatened with a sack, or they could be transferred, or they could be given £1,000. That was the sort of framework. And there was this huge pressure on individuals to sign that letter and give away their rights. And we had a campaign encouraging people not to sign, and it was referred to in the news broadcast. We also launched a thing which was called Option C, which was to give individual members of staff the opportunity to stay inside the trade union, and that we would support them. And we made a historic pledge with the backing of the TUC that we would cover their salaries indefinitely if they were sacked for belonging to a trade union. And that became a pledge that the TUC did a levy for, that the unions put money in for, and became, if you like, the insurance or the reassurance to the sacked members. And so the context really, at the height of Thatcherism, the miners' strike was about to start, here was the Tory government trying to ban trade unions. And also it was in this secret institution. It was before Spooks. It wasn't on every film that you got a reference to GCHQ. People were finding out about it for the first time.
Thank you. And once this information was out, once you knew what was happening and people in a wider world knew what was happening, Brian, what were your thoughts and actions at that point once you had that information?
Well, I'd made my decision 2 or 3 days after the announcement that I wasn't going to sign, and I just had to take it from there. And you know, it was more or less off the hoof. We just took things as it came, and the pressure was on, but we couldn't do anything else but stick by our guns. And I don't really know what else I could have done.
Brilliant. And Mike, you were there in that same situation and people were acting and differently and taking different decisions. What were your thoughts and what was your initial actions?
Well, my initial thoughts, there were 2 possibilities. One was to shift hearth and home to God knows where. And if you're a Chinese linguist, the only other job that's available is in Washington, DC. And it probably, the idea of the ban came from there anyway, possibly along with getting aligned with the Thatcher's innate hatred of trade unions, put the 2 things together, and we were in dead trouble, of course. But rather than move, some of us, including Brian and myself, decided to stay put and fight it out. And vitally, we had the love and full support of our spouses and families, and that was vital. We couldn't have got going without that. And of course, the moral and financial backing of our unions and the full support of the whole international trade union and labour movement. As it turned out, as the months rolled by, it was amazing, the support all over the world. You know, 30 different countries, leading international confederations. Sent long messages of support. I've got a load of them here, but what Thatcher told the civil service trade union leaders, she said, was with a terrible thing. She said there is an inherent conflict between the structure of trade unions and loyalty to the state. Now that is a fascist type of argument. But in a 6-hour Commons debate, Dennis Healy described the ban as the most damaging conflict of loyalty known to man. Loyalty to principle as opposed to loyalty to family. He also said every trade unionist in Britain feels threatened by what the government has done at GCHQ. So there we are. I found that the full enormity of the ban took a little while to sink in, but when it did, the pressure started. The only time it lifted is when you were asleep. Waking up each morning was followed by a few seconds of normal tranquility, and then wallop. A friend described it to me as like being bereaved. And another acquaintance of mine who not given the use of the term fascist easily, he said it was a fascist stroke.
I think that's a big part of it, the way people felt, but the support that was gathered around it, and it's in the context of what was going on politically and with unions and the miners' strikes, and in that kind of context, it must have been important to have that support to carry on. And I know that financially and organisationally, it was a huge campaign, not only in terms of how long it went on, but the money and actions that were involved. Kate and Quinn, I think, can you tell me a little bit more about how you worked to support and build the campaign?
Well, as I said, that our secretary at the time, his wife worked at GCHQ and was one of the SAC, so we were involved. But we became really involved after the '87 election, where some of the members had left, and the campaign was a bit short on hand. So we were invited into the office, and we worked in the office. And also we helped out on the roadshow, and we've done various marches. In fact, we covered the whole of the Britain. We were up in Glasgow, Liverpool, Blackpool, Brighton, Bournemouth, Bridlington, Oxford, London, and we even done Bognor Regis Labour Party. And we were there right at the start, and we put a lot of hard work into the campaign. And I know how much the full-time officials and the teams respected on what we did.
Yeah, and for me, it was a more local affair. So I was involved with the local council civil service unions. We would meet regularly at the Civil Service Club in Gloucester, where we would talk about upcoming events locally with support, so picket lines, marches, and also keeping the message alive within our local union branches. My partner was also active in the CPSA, and we would produce extracts from Warning Signal, circulate it to the members. We would try and galvanise people to get up early in the morning and come and protest. I certainly remember many occasions standing outside, holding up the signs, spelling out "Restore Our Rights," and then someone worked out you could make it into the anagram of Tories Out, so we did that. So yeah, supporting the local events was really important.
Brilliant, thank you. So looking at the wider campaign still, and looking at how it was supported by the TUC and Labour. Can you tell me more about that, John?
Certainly can, and I want to just pick up the point that Mike made, that absolutely the thing that welded people together was the fact that every British trade union, every trade union all over the world was being suggested that it couldn't be trusted to help the government in times of need, that somehow there was a conflict of interest between a trade unionist and being a proper member of society, which is entirely the opposite thing that trade unions is about. That's what moulded the international campaign. We had no difficulty at all with the international campaign. To repeat what Mike said, it was absolutely fantastic, the sort of support that we got, and the support that we got inside the UK was unbelievable in these circumstances. But we stood on the model high ground here. It was Mrs. Thatcher who wasn't on the model high ground, and so we did extraordinarily well. And our job, essentially, was to make sure that every union was informed what was going on, that every union told their members what was going on, and that all the members of the trade unions in Great Britain joined in the demonstrations, joined in defeating what was in fact a scandal which hit Britain. And it was a signal, exactly what the Tory party was about. It was about destroying the role of the British trade union movement, and it picked on people who they thought couldn't fight back. Well, perhaps they couldn't have fought back. It was a problem in the Tories assuming that somehow or other a strike was going to happen in GCHQ, and it never did. And the members at GCHQ would not have done anything which interfered with national security. And that was a slur, that somehow or another national security was going to be put at risk if people joined the trade union and were active in it. And we beat that argument. But it took us a long time, but we did it out of solidarity with international trade unions and the trade unions in the UK. That's how we won that, because we were on the model high ground and they were wrong. And we've proven that, and it stands in our stead now, I think, that we've done that. And lots of people suffered from that. And that's the sort of people we've got here today whose families suffered, and suffered greatly because of that ban. And people shouldn't forget, it just wasn't the trade unions that were affected. Generally, there was individuals who were severely damaged because of what she did.
And I think it's astonishing how long that campaign was. The kind of really digging in and sticking to it, and all of the hard work that went into it is amazing. And I just want to ask a bit more about how you kept yourselves going, what kind of actions you did. I know you had actions at Toll Puddle, and what was it that kept your energy going during this?
That's a difficult question. I'd made the decision, and therefore I had to do whatever I could to stand up for the rights that we were losing. And the only way to do it was to fight from the office that we set up in Cheltenham. We all had different jobs in there. One of our colleagues who's no longer with us was running the office. Mike was in the office. I took over running the roadshow and ordering the various products to go out with the roadshow. And fortunately, when Chris Dimmock gave up running the roadshow, I took over. And my wife came along with me, and we met people that I never thought I was going to meet. There was a plus from the campaign as well as a minus, because we found that there was a different world outside there from what there was within GCHQ. And there were people in there that I'd never thought I'd meet. John, Rodney Bickerstaff, people like that who I'd seen on television and that speaking. And to us, they were friends, and we were friends to them. And it was such a great positive from the movement that the negatives really weren't that negative as far as I was concerned.
You found yourself in the strangest of positions. In July 97, after we knew we'd won, I was invited across to the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, which were holding their biennial meeting in the Waterfront Hall in Belfast. And I was put on to speak for 5 minutes, and I gave it my all. And there I was, a Chinese linguist from GCHQ of all places, standing up, addressing an entire meeting of the 32 counties of Ireland gathered together in Belfast, and the thing got a standing ovation at the end. When you think of what the Irish have gone through, but they're used to non-disputes. That was the Irish dispute has been going on for 800 years, so, which is quite helpful. I knew that I'm half Irish myself, but I knew that was a useful section of the world's population to contact, because the Irish don't give up. Never, never.
And I think it's probably worth, I mean, there was a huge commitment from all of the civil service unions and the wider trade unions. So we actually set up an office. We sort of tried to do a parallel union structure. We set up GCHQ trade unions for all of the members who were still in the union, which at that time in the original bit was more than 100 before the sackings took place and so on. And we had a journal called Warning Signal, because we still wanted to communicate with all of the staff who had left the union but didn't want to. And you wanted to keep that atmosphere going. We had the first demonstration on the anniversary of it after a year in Cheltenham that went on every year, and the whole trade union movement, opposition leaders, people came, come rain or shine, all the way through to 1997. We took them to court. Everything that we could think of went into that campaign and kept it sustaining. You know, it did year on year on year, and I can't count the number of standing ovations that the members got, but that was because they kept on getting invited, and there was a huge commitment. Mike and others, they went to other disputes, they went to miners, they went to Silent Night, they went to Wapping and so on, and they became a key part of. Yeah, no, he'll give you the list, but they became a key part of the trade union opposition to what Thatcher was doing, and it became the symbol. And the TUC never dropped its commitment all the way through. And actually, the Labour Party as well it was a key objective was to get them to commit to restoring trade unions as one of the first acts of a Labour government. And probably that's why this hotel is so significant, because we gathered here, didn't we, in 1992, when it was expected that Labour would win. And they didn't, and I remember us going home feeling very depressed. And it was the members literally took over running the office. They took over doing the admin, they took over looking after the money, they took over organising the roadshow and things for another 5 years until we got back. So there was a really long commitment by people to making sure that the campaign kept going and kept its legs going. Because if we'd given up, then the issue would have died and it would have gone away. And so I think there's, apart from the merit, it is a really good trade union, I think, exemplar of how you sustain and keep a campaign going as a wider issue to success in the end.
I think at the moment, or in my time, we've had campaigns that are 100 days or kind of months. And when you talk about something that's years and where it becomes part of pledges from government and their campaigns, then I think that really does show the impact that it had and how big an effect the campaign was having on the world at large, and how it was so part of that context at the time. So you mentioned that there was the two campaigns around the elections. The 1992 election characterised as the worst night, and the 1997 election, the best night, the result that you wanted in many ways. Can you tell me more about that side of it, the kind of how you felt when you were dealing with it in the wider context politically?
Well, I mean, I'm sure others will want to come in, but I mean, after for the 1992 election, we set up something called trade unions in GCHQ, which was going to be the framework for when we went back and organised. We described it as the last hurdle. We had one of the members called John Cook going around the country leaping over a hurdle for the unions to go back. But actually, when it came to the 97 elections, there had been covert discussions with both the government and the department and the staff association about trying to facilitate, if you like, trade unions going back, and the atmosphere had changed quite a lot. But I think the important thing was the support of the wider trade union movement. I mean, there was a shock to the government during the sort of the time of the ban, when the electricians, who were not a progressive trade union at the time, threatened that they would go on strike if they sacked people in GCHQ. And it was 1988, and you know, the SAC members really ought to talk about it, but it was quite a long time after the ban. After they'd won the 1987 election, the Tories actually plucked up courage to then sack what was 14 members by that point. And then that launched a different campaign. I remember it was Brendan Barber at the TUC. We got all of the 14 members together and saying, look, you are going to become the focus of the campaign, but that is going to change your lives if that's the case. And it did, but they all stepped forward and enabled it to happen. If the 14 SAC members hadn't been prepared to become the focus of the campaign, we wouldn't have been able to carry on to 97.
I knew it was a different sort of campaign that we were able to run, because it wasn't about the normal industrial relations things about conditions of service and pay. This was about human rights, and we knew that we had it right, and we knew that we had the support. It flooded in, and although we did get beat when we went to the European Court, of course we got beat because it was mounted against us. But it was, on reflection, it was the right thing to do, because it showed that we were prepared to debate this issue in public about how it affected everybody, not just trade unionists, but everybody in the world this thing was affected by. So to some extent, the leadership had it made for them, but what I had to do was to protect the people who were individually going to get damaged in GCHQ. That was what we had to do, and we got the support and work for that as well. So, you know, it was a campaign. Once it was rather difficult for most people, it was a campaign that you knew eventually you could win, and we did. And we did it because we did it properly. We never shifted off the model high ground. We said this is wrong, the government's made a mistake, and it affects everybody in the country. And to some extent, it was a campaign which had a lot of joy running, except at the back of that, it was a lot of people were going to get damaged. Plus, the security of the country was being put at risk as well by this action of the government. They didn't think it through, and they blamed us for all sorts of things which we were not guilty. And we managed to prove we weren't guilty. And luckily, eventually, we managed to persuade the Labour Party that it was to their benefit to support the rest of the country, given the right to belong to a trade union of your choice.
I think as it went on, we get the different sides of the trade union movement started to learn more about each other and to cooperate more. I mean, the whole essence of trade unionism is helping each other, and that's what happened. And we got support from every possible segment of industry and industrial trade unions, and in turn, we try to give that back. Yeah, because if you don't give other people support, they're not going to bother giving you.
Speaking of that support, Quinn.
And we've
it was
a hell of a lot.
The longer I was involved in the campaign, the more of a farce we saw that it was. I'll give you a couple of instances where one member, when the ban came out, he left because of the ban, got £1,000 and went to an agency. Now GCHQ was short of a worker. So GCHQ manager went to this agency. And who came along from the agency? Our colleague who had just left. He had a £10,000 a week a year increase plus a company car. Now at GCHQ, they do security checks. And one of the security people went up to him and he showed him his ASTMS card, shared union card. That was one point. There's another point, is that all the information that's gathered from GCHQ, MI5, MI6 goes to the Intelligence Committee. Now, people on that committee were in the FDA and were allowed to belong to a trade union. So you had people who gathered the information from GCHQ, couldn't be a trade union, but people who were looking at the whole thing could be a member.
Okay. Yeah, I think we talk about the unifying aspects of the cafe, but because it was so unified on the trade union side, I think it made the Labour Party's pledge to restore rights, it strengthened that, and the feeling when that election happened in '97, and one of the first act of what we call was to announce that, and I believe there was a trade union conference going on at the time, and it was a friendly affair, as I recall from before, because we were having a bit of a bust about rules, something that never happened. And then the announcement came, and I don't know how long people cheered for, but it was a long time, and it brought everybody together for about 5 minutes. But for me, that was the end of my journey, where I had joined the Labour Party on the back of that pledge, and that then led to.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Well done.
So it was a campaign that you may not have realised how long it was going to go on for. I'm sure you didn't, and you may not have realised quite how big it was going to get. How did it feel to be the face of that campaign, Mike?
Well, if you're in a position like that, and you're keen enough on it and determined on it, and you've got enormous support, you can only go forward, and you grow in in what you do. And I mean, where I am now is a fair bit different to the way I was. Before the ban, I divided my life into two halves: before the ban and after the ban.
You were 6'5" before.
And Brian, you and your family were there as well. How did you feel about it becoming such a big campaign?
Well, we took it a day at a time, and it just carried on. You know, we were there to win, and we weren't going to give in. If it hadn't ended in 1997, we would have carried on till 2007 or 2017, whatever happened, we would have still been there.
However long it took, you know, that was it, wasn't it?
So this unwielding campaign cost an awful lot of money, I know. How did the unions manage to afford this, John?
Well, the fact of the matter was, of course, that the day of the announcement, 10,000 of our members, we lost 10% of our members at one go. Now, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't fill that vacuum immediately. And the rest of the movement helped us to pay the staff, and I've got some, you know, to say about Newby helped us out for the first month when we just didn't have sufficient number to pay the staff. That's how bad it was. But we had a special conference, and the members turned up to vote for an extra 5p a week on their subscription. And unbeknown to me, who moved the motion, I thought after last night taking it for an increase, the president had agreed that they could move an amendment, and it wasn't that sort of conference. Well, we're all used to that sort of conference, aren't we? Well, you can't, but the president was like, and you can't do that, you can't do this. Said, we're doing it. And somebody moved an amendment for 10p a week, you know, to double the NEC's recommendation, and it was carried unanimously, and the union survived for another 4 years, and then we merged with the Society of Civil and Public Servants and created a new CPS, and that was the kickstart of all the mergers in the civil service trade union movement. So a lot of things came good out of it. The thing that you have to say thank you to is the staff of the unions as well. The staff of the unions worked so hard in this campaign, and I know I'm suggesting that you had a nice campaign to campaign about, where you couldn't actually lose because you were attacking a government which was wrong. But the staff had to work doubly hard during that process, and I always say thank you to them for that. But the British trade union movement stood its ground, and we all have to be grateful for that. We can do it when we're under pressure, and we can do it again. It's not a one-off. This, nobody's tried it again. We held the model. We held the model like that, but we were able to organise because people put their backs into it, and from top to bottom, they put their backs into it.
And just to reinforce that, I mean, on the money side, I mean, there was what the CSU had to do, but the TUC did a levy of 5p per member of every member of the trade union movement, and that provided a sort of capital. And so when the sackings took place, and we fulfilled the pledge of maintaining the salary of all of the SAC members, that cost was shared by that levy and all of the civil service unions together, which spread the cost across. It wasn't just the union they came from, and it was done sort of pro rata according to how rich they were and how much money they had. But that was a huge commitment that went on for years and years, and it was money that was never got back at the end of the day. But it did show collectively what could be done, and I think without that pledge, it would have been impossible, really, for us to sustain the SAC members for what was from 1988 to nearly a decade. If you think of that, of salaries and costs and all of the other things for that period, it was a huge commitment that the trade union movement put into it, you know, and it helped us win.
Yeah. If you made the point that we've been here for so many days, I used to count in days, and I was in the floor hall in Blackpool. Tony Benn went by, and he said, "How many days is it now, Mike?" And I said, 3,170 days. And he said, "Nelson Mandela was in jail for 27 years."
I think it's important that if they'd have got away with it at GCHQ, if these 14 understood, the next lot would have been in line: firefighters, public sector workers, and our biggest supporters were Robin Bickerstaff and Kenny Cameron, because they could see what would have happened if they had got away with GCHQ. So these 14 were a bulwark against that. If they hadn't have been there, they would have gone through the public sector like wildfire. So the rest of the trade union movement has got an enormous debt to pay for these 14 people and what we did.
Definitely, absolutely. And an important part of the story is that you won with incredible effort and hard work from people here and lots of people working on it and supporting you and dedication. You got there in the end. Can you tell me a little bit, after being out of the workplace and being out for so long and setting up so many systems, Hugh, what was it like when you started to get ready to go back?
I mean, it was an amazing set of negotiations. I mean, John will probably be able to talk about the, it wasn't quite the first act of the Labour government. We had to just sort of ensure that they did, but it was very, very quick. But then it was an unprecedented
4 months, 4
yes,
and a half months.
yeah, but it was unprecedented. It was the individuals who were of age were offered their jobs back. They could go back to work.
Yeah.
The pensions of them was restored, not of the lost time of the 70 years. And when we were doing that discussion, it was just unprecedented. There were no rules or regulations about how do you take somebody who wasn't at work, give them the credit and the time for that back, and restore their pension back to what it would have been. And so virtually everything we were doing, there isn't a huge track record of trade union victories where you go back and you get reinstatement and you get people back, and so like the collective agreement that we came to again was groundbreaking, because we got the staff federation that have been there to transfer their engagements to the national trade union. We got the other unions to agree it would only be PCS. We did an agreement that meant that individual staff maintain their right to belong to a trade union and their right to take industrial action. And so the things that we had campaigned for, we were actually able to translate into real life collective agreements and re-establish, and there are now trade unions in GCHQ when people are there. And it would not have, I mean, I was repeating what Quinn said, but to get to that point where we were able to have those discussions couldn't have happened. And, you know, people like Mike and Brian were too old to go back to work, but actually the rights of a number of people did. There were some of the people who did go back to work and are still working there. You know, it's an unbelievable story, really.
So this, if you like, the professional skill of the negotiators made it relatively simple to make an agreement, because people on both sides wanted to make an agreement and put the justice right. But it wasn't easy with the National Labour Party. I've got to say that you know, there was a lot of pressure on us to sign things like no strike agreements and stuff like that, and that caused a lot of difficulty for the national negotiators, because we were under pressure to make an agreement to get these people back to work and to restore the right to belong to a trade union. And if it hadn't have been for the intervention of some key people in the cabinet, then we would have still been bloody arguing about whether we could have a paragraph in about withdrawing the right to strike in GCHQ, which is a nasty precedent for all of the other trade unions. So we stuck to our guns on that. And to be fair to the Labour Party, they eventually sent us a very nice letter that I had the pleasure of reading out with the conference you referred to, and everything was set fair then for a detailed negotiation, which restored the rights properly and restored what people have lost. So, but it wasn't an easy thing after the Labour government got elected, and you can't blame them in a way. They've got to represent their point of view, and there was a lot of pressure groups were supporting what Thatcher was saying. A lot of pressure groups were supporting, including the Americans. There's no doubt about it. We've sidled around it, but the Americans were putting an awful lot of money into GCHQ, and they were pulling the strings about the ban. So it had got a lot of support from grey-suited people, grey-suited men, I think, that probably at the time. And, you know, the Labour Party had to negotiate its way around that, and we had to be part of that negotiation. We acted properly, and we got an agreement, and we were back. And it was, I think, probably the best day of my life. I got to read it. I didn't read every paragraph, I've got to say, but we were there. And Mike was there. The lads were there with the show them your little plastic bag.
Plastic bag.
That's one of the most famous things. Yeah, there you go.
The first order of 3,000 plastic bags went to a firm that after we'd been dishing them out for a while. I'm very proud of plastic bags because I believe it was my idea. And anyway, the first 3,000 was made by a firm which never later found out was non-union.
Well, yeah. We all make mistakes, Mike.
Yeah, we all make mistakes.
So once it was reaching its end and you had the news and you were either going back or not, what was the lasting impact for you, and what would you say the lessons were learnt, Brian?
Well, I'd like to say first, I'm awfully glad that I was past retirement age when the ban was lifted, because I'd have found it very, very difficult. I would have gone back in, but I would have found it very difficult to work with people, senior management, that I couldn't trust. So in a way, I'm rather glad that I passed retirement age. But yes, the feeling that we'd actually won was great, and the support that we had throughout the campaign, as far as I was concerned, was my winning feeling from the ban, and I couldn't have asked for anything more from the trade unions in that respect. But I was glad that it was finally over, and my wife was rather glad that we got our life back to normal.
Very well said. I found the same thing. I think it was very glad that it was finished. You know, he stuck with me like glue all the way through. But it's a long time. Let's expect people to hold together. The first date anybody of the 14 that wanted to go back, and just over half of us were too old by that time, was the 3rd of September 1997. And I think, in fact, 3 people went back to Jamaica. And 3rd of September is 3 days after the month of August, in which I was 60, so I couldn't go back. So, thank goodness for that. I just felt it on the bound to go back if it had been otherwise.
And for people in Cheltenham and that have been involved, what was the impact of people's feelings there, and what were the lessons learned?
Well, it's great. Like, I remember when the ban was announced, I was up at Bridlington for the FBU conference, and we were at an international social there, and the speakers were from South Africa and Cuba. And about 10:30, somebody came in who had been listening to the 10 o'clock news on the BBC. And it was announced then that the next day Robin Cook would be lifting the ban on trade unions at GCHQ. And I'll always remember there was whispers going around the room there. One was telling another, one was telling another, and you know, they came round and they slapping me on the back, and I landed up sinking whiskies down with Kenny Cameron and the Morning Star reporter. So it was a good day, and you know, it was very emotional to me. I've been involved in it, and I'm proud to say that I was. And the thing is, I've made friends for life. You know, if I got one thing to thank Margaret Thatcher for, is that I met these wonderful people. I wish it would have been in different circumstances.
Kate? I mean, I think it taught me a lesson in life, which is about the importance of standing up for your principles, and how it's often not necessarily the most likely people who end up doing that, but it's very brave. But just say something about, we had the conference, that fantastic moment when John announced the lifting of the ban, and I borrowed off a fellow delegate, because not everyone had mobile phones, phoned up my partner Jonathan and passed on the news, and we had a little bit of a cry and a cheer, and then months later, we were all set to get up early on the 31st of August 1997. Rain against the window, the news is on, there's been some quite tragic news, and we have a celebratory march, which was the wettest, most miserable march. But nonetheless, we did it because we had won, and it was the most fantastic feeling.
Excellent.
And lessons learned, the ongoing, what would you say, Hugh?
It was a growing up of the civil service trade union movement. I mean, we were sort of probably by the rest of the trade union movement not regarded as real trade unions. We were white collar civil servants people, and we weren't miners and so on and things. But actually the campaign, I think it gave us credibility across the international and the British trade union movement. And I think it enabled the unions themselves to grow up into being not ex-staff associations, but into proper trade unions going forward. And I think it gave a lot of confidence that Thatcher could be taken on, you know, and you didn't have to roll up and give away. And so it was sort of, I think, the most significant. And I think, you know, we talk about the sacked workers, but actually we probably ought to talk about the reinstated workers. I mean, you don't get many trade union victories. And that's why I think this event has been really good. We ought to celebrate the fact that we were able to, after a long period of time, get trade unions back. And there is a sort of tradition in the trade union movement that we celebrate glorious defeats. And I think we ought to just try a little bit harder to celebrate a glorious victory.
John, final word.
Well, I think there's lots of lessons to be learned, isn't there? And you was absolutely right. But the real lesson to be learned now is that we've got to make sure that trade unionism spreads again. Because without trade unionism, you're just likely to get this sort of announcement, but done silently, by not recognising trade unions, by not people having the protection of trade unions. You've got here an example of what being a member of a trade union can actually do for working people. And this didn't do it just for working people in GCHQ, it did it for working people across the world. Now, come on, this is not a bad selling point, is it, for belonging to a trade union? So we've just got to watch out that they don't do it by stealth, by making it this a country where it is difficult to belong to a trade union because there's no trade union recognition. And I'm not trying to be negative here because I'm really joyful about this meeting, and it makes back many happy memories for me as an individual.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really important note to end on, and you're quite right. I think we've all got a lot of lessons to be learned from this, and we need to remember everything that went into the campaign and that it was a success through the hard work of the people involved and the unions. And I'd like to thank you all very much, not only as a worker and a unionist, but especially as a PCS member in the civil service. So thank you very much for that.